The prairie wind carried a hollow sound across the worn fences and dry earth of Hollow Creek, a place where secrets traveled slower than dust, yet clung far longer. Folks in town liked to pretend they didn't know about the old cabin hidden behind the tall pines, but everyone had heard whispers about the girl who never walked among them. Some called her cursed, others said she was a burden her own kin couldn't bear to show, but no one ever dared to go up that lonely path. People in those days believed anything different was a danger to their name, and reputation was worth more than truth. That was why the story of the girl behind locked doors had stayed hidden for years. Tucked away like a shameful mark no one wanted to speak aloud. Inside that dim cabin lived a young woman named Leora, a fragile soul with pale hair that shimmered like winter frost and eyes too gentle for the rough lands around her. Her father, a rugged rancher known as Iron Mason, kept her shut away from the world. He built high walls around her life and reinforced them with fear. He said it was for her own protection that people would mock her, judge her, or worse. But Leora had begun to understand something far deeper. Her father wasn't afraid of what the world would do to her. He was afraid of what the world would say about him. To him, she was a reminder of a past he wished he could bury, and the easiest way to bury something was to keep it out of sight. The only sounds Leora grew used to were the creak of rusty hinges, the heavy thud of bolts sliding shut, and the distant neigh of horses she was never allowed to see. Days blurred into nights, marked only by a small crack of sunlight slipping through the wooden panels. Over time, she learned to measure the passing hours by the warmth that crossed the room. Still, she dreamed of open skies, tall grass brushing her calves, and the taste of fresh wind on her face. In those dreams, she was free, even if her waking life chained her to shadows. Her world began to shift the morning she heard hooves pounding against the dirt with a rhythm she had never heard before. Her father rarely had visitors, and when he did, they arrived quietly, whispering about cattle or debts. But this approach sounded strong, sure, and far from hesitant. Leora leaned toward the barred window, trying to catch a glimpse of who had come. All she saw was a tall figure on a dark horse, a man whose presence seemed carved from stone and fire. His hair was long and black, tied behind him in a way that spoke of tradition. Even from a distance, she sensed something powerful about him. Something different from the rough men who dealt in lies and whiskey. His name was Thunderhawk, a respected Apache known across the region for his steady heart and fierce loyalty. Folks often spoke about him with a mix of awe and fear. Some said he moved like a shadow and could track a trail no one else could see. Others said he carried wisdom beyond his years and strength built from hardship. He had come to Hollow Creek on a quiet mission of peace, helping settle disputes between settlers and his people, but fate had a way of twisting a man's path toward things he never expected. Thunderhawk stepped off his horse and approached Iron Mason with calm purpose. He had heard rumors of a hidden daughter, a girl trapped away from sight, and though he didn't know why fate tugged him toward that ranch, he followed the feeling. The air around the two men grew tense. Iron Mason didn't like unexpected questions, especially those that pointed toward the one truth he guarded more fiercely than his land. Leora watched them from her narrow view, sensing the weight of the moment, even without hearing the words. For the first time in her life, she saw her father rattled. His shoulders stiffened, his voice grew sharp, and he stood between the Apache warrior and the path leading to the back rooms. Thunderhawk didn't react with anger, he simply observed him with quiet patience, as if reading every lie before it left Mason's mouth. Something about that calm presence stirred hope inside Leora, a feeling she didn't recognize at first because she had never felt it before. It was the hope that someone might finally see her, truly see her. Later that day, when the sun dipped low and the evening painted the land in gold, Thunderhawk walked around the property, letting instinct guide him. He paused near the back wall where Leora's room sat hidden like a forgotten chamber. She pressed her hand against the wood, sensing footsteps she didn't recognize. The silence between them grew heavy, yet somehow comforting. Then, for the first time, a voice reached her, soft but steady. "Is someone inside?" The simple question struck her like a spark. No one had ever asked. No one had ever wondered. She hesitated, unsure if answering would bring trouble. but loneliness had worn down her fear over the years. She moved closer to the crack in the boards and whispered with a trembling breath, "Yes." Thunderhawk didn't speak again, but she felt his presence linger, as if he was trying to understand the truth hidden behind those walls. He could hear the weakness in her voice, the strain of someone who had been locked away for longer than any person should be. He had seen cruelty before, but never wrapped in the disguise of protection. That night Iron Mason doubled the locks and warned her not to make a sound if she wanted to avoid trouble. But his voice shook. He knew the Apache warrior had sensed something, and he feared what might come next. Fear often pushes a man to make choices that break whatever goodness is left in him, and Leora saw that in her father's eyes. He wasn't trying to protect her anymore. He was trying to protect himself. The wind picked up outside, rattling loose boards and stirring dust, but Leora couldn't sleep. She sat near the metal bars fixed across the inner door, staring at the faint glow of the moon. Somewhere out on the land, Thunderhawk was likely preparing to confront the truth he had discovered. She didn't know what he planned or why he cared, but for the first time, she prayed for a stranger's return. At dawn, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. Not her father's. These steps were strong and steady. Leora's heart thudded as shadows moved outside her cell. A firm hand gripped the bars. She looked up to see the same tall warrior standing inches from her, his expression both fierce and gentle. Her breath caught. His presence filled the small space, overpowering the fear she had lived with for years. Thunderhawk didn't speak right away. He studied her face, taking in the truth of her suffering. His voice finally broke the quiet, low, and certain. "You do not belong in chains." Before she could respond, a loud crash shook the cabin. Angry footsteps thundered toward them. Her father's voice roared in fury, the sound of a man who realized he was losing control of the secret he had guarded his whole life. Thunderhawk's hand tightened around the bars as the door behind him burst open. The moment seemed to stretch, suspended on the edge of something dangerous and life-changing. Leora felt her breath freeze, her heart pounding with fear and a strange flicker of hope. What happened next would change everything about her world. But the moment hung in place, balanced between danger and freedom, waiting for the next turn of fate. Thunderhawk did not move when the cabin door slammed open behind him. He stood steady, as if the roar of Iron Mason was nothing more than another gust of wind pushing through the broken boards. Leora watched with wide eyes, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen her father look so shaken, his anger mixed with a fear he couldn't hide. The light from the hallway cast a sharp line across his face, revealing a man who had spent years burying truths under layers of pride and control. Now those layers were cracking. Iron Mason pointed a trembling finger at the Apache warrior. "Step away from her," he snapped, his voice raw and uneven. "She's my blood, my responsibility. You have no right here." Thunderhawk didn't answer. Instead, he glanced back at Leora, his eyes calm and steady, grounding her trembling heart. Then he turned toward the rancher with a measured breath, standing between Leora and the danger she had known her whole life. His silence seemed far more powerful than any threat, as if he could see straight through Iron Mason's rage to the fear beneath it. Leora could not move. Her hands clutched the bars so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She had dreamt of someone standing up for her, but dreams had always faded in the dimness of her locked room. Now, a real man, a warrior from a world she had never been allowed to know, stood inches away, refusing to move, even as her father's fury burned hot enough to choke the air. Iron Mason stepped forward, but Thunderhawk lifted one hand slightly. It was not a threat. It was a warning born from calm purpose. The rancher froze, remembering who stood before him. Thunderhawk was respected across the region not because of his strength alone, but because he carried honor like a shield. Crossing a man like him came with consequences. "You need to leave my land," Iron Mason growled. "Now." Thunderhawk finally spoke, his voice low. "No one should live behind iron." Iron Mason flinched, his jaw tight. The truth in those words hit deeper than any accusation. Leora felt something shift inside her. For years she had swallowed the idea that the outside world would despise her. For years she believed her pale skin and quiet nature made her unfit for the open fields. Her father had shaped her fear so carefully, she didn't know where his voice ended and hers began. But hearing Thunderhawk say those simple words made her realize she had never been the problem. Iron. Mason's reply came through gritted teeth. This is my home, my rules. Stay out of what you don't understand. Thunderhawk held his gaze for a long moment. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough so Leora could see the resolve forming in his expression. It was clear he wasn't there by accident. Something larger had brought him to her, before another word could pass between them. Iron Mason yanked the door shut and slid the bolt, trapping Leora once again. The clang of metal echoed through her chest. Thunderhawk's face disappeared behind the heavy wood, and she felt the small fragment of hope flicker, but not vanish. She pressed her hands to the cold bars, listening as the two men's voices moved away from her room. Their words were muffled, but she could hear the tension in every tone. Iron Mason wanted the Apache gone. Thunderhawk refused to leave until he understood why Leora was imprisoned. Their voices rose and fell, but then the door at the front of the house slammed. Silence followed. Leora didn't know whether Thunderhawk had left or if he was waiting outside. The uncertainty made her stomach twist. She sank to the floor, drawing her knees to her chest, trying to understand the storm building around her. She had never seen anyone defy her father, never imagined anyone would question the life she had lived. She didn't know what Thunderhawk wanted, but she knew he wasn't like the men her father feared. Hours passed, and the cabin remained quiet. Iron Mason did not return. Leora didn't know where he went or what he planned, but she felt the air shift with a kind of preparation she didn't understand. The sun hid behind thick clouds, dimming the narrow light that filtered through her boards. Her thoughts drifted